Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night for no obvious reason? Not because of a loud noise, not because you needed the bathroom, just suddenly awake, staring into the darkness, wondering why your sleep was interrupted again. What most people never realize is that some of the brain's earliest warning signals can appear during sleep, long before any daytime symptoms emerge. For many adults over 60, health concerns are measured during the day: blood pressure readings, doctor appointments, energy levels, memory changes. Yet certain nighttime patterns often go unnoticed, even though they may begin months or years before more serious brain-related problems start to reveal themselves. The unsettling part is that these sleep disruptions are often dismissed as a normal part of getting older. People assume fragmented sleep simply comes with age, so they stop questioning it. They stop looking for answers. And that raises a troubling question. If so many people experience these nighttime events, why do so few realize they may be connected to something much larger? Maybe this is starting to sound familiar. You fall asleep without much difficulty. Then, for reasons you can't explain, you're suddenly awake at 2:13 a.m. or 3:41 a.m. Not fully alert, not fully asleep, just stuck somewhere in between, wondering what pulled you out of rest again. For others, the pattern looks different. They don't necessarily remember waking up, but they wake up feeling as if they spent the entire night working instead of recovering. Their body was in bed for 7 or 8 hours, yet their mind feels strangely heavy, as though sleep happened, but restoration never arrived. Some people notice something else. They find themselves constantly changing positions throughout the night, turning to one side, then the other, adjusting pillows, moving blankets, searching for comfort that never seems to last very long. Then there are those who wake up at nearly the same time every night. Not once in a while, not after a stressful day, but repeatedly, week after week, month after month, as though some hidden clock inside the body keeps triggering the same interruption. What makes these experiences so confusing is that they appear completely unrelated on the surface. Different people experience different symptoms. Different nights bring different frustrations. Yet these patterns often seem to travel together more often than chance would predict. And once you begin looking closely, an even more important question starts to emerge. Could some of these nighttime experiences actually be early clues hiding in plain sight? When people think about warning signs related to brain health, they usually imagine dramatic symptoms: a sudden loss of balance, slurred speech, confusion that appears out of nowhere. But what if some of the earliest signals are far more subtle, so subtle that most people dismiss them for years without a second thought? One of the most common patterns is frequent awakenings, not necessarily staying awake for long periods, just brief interruptions that break the natural flow of sleep. Many people barely remember them the next morning, yet the brain remembers every disruption, even when conscious awareness does not. And over time, those interruptions can begin to add up. Another sign often overlooked is restless repositioning throughout the night, the constant need to adjust, shift, turn over, or search for a more comfortable position. Most people assume this is simply a mattress issue or an aging body, but sometimes the reason may not be as obvious as it appears. Then there is the strange experience of feeling unusually alert during hours when the brain should be deeply resting. You wake up and instantly feel awake, your eyes open, your mind begins thinking, and despite feeling tired the next day, your brain seemed unwilling to fully settle during the night. The question is, why that happens in the first place? Many adults also describe waking with mental fog that seems difficult to explain. They slept long enough, they stayed in bed long enough, yet their thoughts feel slower, their memory feels less reliable, and their energy never fully returns.
Individually, each of these signs appears harmless, but when they begin appearing together, they may be pointing toward a pattern that most people have been taught to interpret completely the wrong way. For decades, many people have been told the same thing. You're getting older. Sleep changes are normal. Waking up more often is normal. Feeling less refreshed is normal. And while there is some truth in that idea, the full story may be far more complicated. Aging does influence the way the brain and body sleep. Sleep cycles can become lighter. Deep sleep may become less frequent. Recovery can take longer, and nighttime awakenings may become more common. But none of that automatically explains every disruption that occurs after the age of 60. The problem begins when every symptom gets placed into the same category. Wake up 3 times a night? That's aging. Feel exhausted despite sleeping? That's aging. Struggle with mental clarity in the morning? That's aging. Eventually, the label becomes so broad that people stop asking whether something else could be happening underneath the surface. What if some of these nighttime experiences are being misunderstood? What if the awakening is not the problem itself? What if the restlessness is not the problem itself? What if the unusual alertness is not the problem itself? Sometimes the symptom people notice is simply the visible part of a process they cannot yet see, and visible signals often exist for a reason. This shift in perspective changes everything. Instead of asking how to suppress the symptom, a different question begins to emerge. What is the symptom trying to communicate? What is the brain responding to during those hours when recovery should be taking place? And when researchers and sleep experts started looking beyond the disruptions themselves, they began to notice a fascinating connection that most people never consider.
At first glance, these symptoms seem completely unrelated. A person wakes up several times during the night. Another struggles with brain fog in the morning. Someone else notices increasing forgetfulness during the day, and another finds themselves constantly shifting positions while trying to sleep. Most people assume these are separate problems requiring separate explanations. That assumption seems reasonable until a pattern begins to emerge. The same individuals who report fragmented sleep often describe persistent mental fatigue. The same people who feel unrested frequently mention lapses in concentration. The same nights filled with interruptions are often followed by mornings that feel mentally heavier. Suddenly, what appeared disconnected starts looking surprisingly connected. And that raises a question few people ever stop to ask. What if these experiences are not independent events? What if they are different expressions of the same underlying process? Much like warning lights on a dashboard, one light may indicate temperature, another may indicate pressure, a third may indicate performance, yet all of them can sometimes point back to a single hidden issue operating beneath the surface. This possibility changes how we interpret everything. Instead of focusing on each symptom individually, the focus shifts towards understanding the environment in which those symptoms appear. Because the brain does not experience sleep in isolated pieces. It experiences the entire night as one continuous biological event. And when something disrupts that event, multiple signals can begin appearing at the same time. The intriguing part is that many of these signals seem to emerge during the exact hours when the brain should be performing some of its most important recovery work. Not during periods of activity, not during moments of stress, but during the very time designed for restoration. Which leads to an even deeper mystery. What may actually be happening inside the brain during sleep that could connect all of these seemingly unrelated experiences? To better understand what may be happening, imagine the brain as a highly sophisticated control center. Every night, it follows a carefully coordinated sequence. Certain systems power down, others shift into recovery mode. Resources are redirected towards restoration, repair, and maintenance.
When that process unfolds correctly, sleep becomes one of the most powerful recovery tools the body possesses. But sometimes the process may not unfold as smoothly as it should. Instead of receiving a clear message to fully rest, the brain may receive mixed signals. Part of the system attempts to enter deeper recovery. Another part remains partially watchful, partially active, partially prepared to respond, as though the brain cannot completely decide whether it is safe to fully let go. This is what we can think of as night mismatch, a hidden nighttime state where recovery and alertness coexist at the same time. Not fully awake, not fully restored, the brain becomes caught between two competing instructions. And when competing instructions occur repeatedly, efficiency begins to suffer. A useful analogy is a computer trying to install critical updates while background alarms continue running. The maintenance process still happens, but it happens less efficiently. Resources become divided, tasks take longer, and some processes never reach their optimal state. The next morning, the system may technically be operational, but it does not perform at its best. What makes night mismatch so difficult to recognize is that most people never feel it directly. They only experience the consequences. The unexplained awakenings, the lingering mental fatigue, the sense that sleep no longer provides the same restoration it once did. And if the brain detects that something is not fully aligned during the night, the body often responds with a surprisingly specific protective reaction that most people never suspect. Most people think the movements they make during sleep are random, a simple habit, a search for comfort, an unconscious routine that means very little. But what if some of those movements are actually responses to signals coming from deep within the brain and body? What if they're serving a purpose? Think about how the body reacts during the day. If something feels wrong, you adjust automatically. You shift your posture, you change positions, you move away from discomfort without even thinking about it. The body is constantly making small corrections in an effort to maintain balance. And the same principle may continue while you sleep. When night mismatch occurs, the brain may remain partially alert even during periods that should be deeply restorative. Instead of completely settling into recovery mode, it continues monitoring internal conditions, looking for changes, responding to subtle disturbances, remaining prepared to act if something feels out of alignment. And that readiness may trigger physical responses throughout the night. This is where the body flip signal becomes important. The body flip signal can be understood as an internal protective response, a mechanism that may prompt repositioning, brief awakenings, feelings of discomfort, or sudden shifts in alertness. What feels like an interruption may actually be the body's attempt to adapt, a correction rather than a malfunction, a response rather than a random event. Suddenly, many nighttime experiences begin to make more sense. The unexplained awakenings, the repeated turning from side to side, the feeling that sleep never stays deep for very long, the strange sensation that your body keeps pulling you out of rest even when you desperately want to stay asleep. And the real concern is not that these interruptions happen occasionally, but what may occur when they repeat themselves night after night, year after year, without ever being fully understood. A single restless night is usually not the problem. Most people experience occasional sleep interruptions and recover without difficulty. The concern begins when the pattern repeats, week after week, month after month, year after year, because the brain experiences the cumulative effect of those disruptions, even if they seem minor on any given night.
The aging brain depends heavily on quality sleep to perform essential maintenance. Sleep is not simply a period of inactivity. It is a time when important recovery processes take place. Memories are organized, neural pathways are reinforced, metabolic waste is cleared, and the brain prepares itself for the demands of the following day.
When night mismatch becomes frequent, those restorative processes may become less efficient. The brain still attempts to recover, but recovery may become fragmented. Resources may become divided. Periods of deep restoration may become shorter, and over time, the gap between time spent sleeping and actual recovery may continue to widen. This is often where people begin noticing changes they cannot easily explain. Mental clarity may not feel as sharp as it once did. Names may take longer to remember. Focus may fade more quickly. Simple tasks may require more effort. Morning brain fog may become increasingly familiar. And many people never connect those daytime experiences to what has been happening during the night for years. The larger concern is that prolonged sleep fragmentation and persistent nighttime stress can overlap with factors associated with declining brain resilience as people age, not because one restless night causes serious harm, but because repeated disruptions may gradually place additional strain on systems the brain relies upon for long-term health. And once you understand how these mechanisms may operate, a completely different question emerges. What if the goal is not simply getting more sleep, but helping the brain recover the way it was designed to? The encouraging news is that understanding the pattern changes the conversation completely. If night mismatch and the body flip signal are responses, then the goal is not to fight the symptoms themselves. The goal is to understand what may be triggering those responses. Because when the underlying conditions improve, the brain often spends less time reacting and more time recovering. That distinction can make all the difference. Many people assume better sleep simply means spending more hours in bed, but recovery and sleep duration are not always the same thing. A person can remain in bed for 8 hours and still experience fragmented restoration. Another may sleep fewer hours, yet experience more efficient recovery. The quality of the brain's nighttime environment often matters as much as the clock itself, and that is where the focus begins to shift. The first step is creating conditions that help the brain feel safe enough to fully commit to restoration, reducing unnecessary disruptions, supporting consistent sleep patterns, minimizing factors that keep internal alert systems active, and encouraging the biological signals that tell the brain it can transition into deeper recovery states. When those signals become clearer, the need for constant monitoring may begin to decrease. At the same time, reducing triggers that activate the body flip signal may help the body remain settled for longer periods. Fewer adjustments, fewer interruptions, fewer moments of unexpected alertness. Instead of repeatedly responding to perceived disturbances, the brain can devote more resources to the restorative work it was designed to perform. That shift may be subtle at first, but over time it can become meaningful. Perhaps the most important thing to understand is that improvement does not necessarily begin with one dramatic change. It often begins with recognizing patterns that were previously ignored, seeing the connections that once seemed unrelated, understanding why the brain may have been responding the way it was. And that naturally leads to the question many people have been waiting for since the beginning. If much of what you've heard today sounds familiar, there is something important you need to remember. These experiences do not automatically mean that a serious event is already underway. They do not guarantee future cognitive decline. They do not mean permanent damage has occurred. And they certainly do not mean your brain has stopped responding to positive change. That is a belief many people carry unnecessarily. One of the most remarkable qualities of the brain is its ability to adapt, even later in life, even after years of less than ideal sleep. The brain remains responsive to supportive conditions. It continues working to maintain balance. It continues seeking recovery whenever the opportunity is available. And that possibility should not be underestimated. This is why awareness matters so much. Not fear, not panic, not obsessing over every interruption during the night, but learning to recognize patterns that may have gone unnoticed for years. Because the sooner those patterns are understood, the easier it becomes to make decisions that support long-term brain health. Imagine waking up feeling more mentally clear, feeling more confident in your memory, feeling less dependent on caffeine or sheer determination to get through the day. Imagine experiencing nights that feel more restorative and mornings that feel more productive. Those improvements may not happen overnight, but they begin with understanding what your body may have been trying to communicate all along. And perhaps that brings us to the most intriguing question of all. If night mismatch and the body flip signal are responses rather than causes, what is the hidden trigger that keeps activating them in the first place? What is the overlooked nighttime factor that countless adults over 60 continue missing? The answer may be far simpler than most people imagine, yet once you see it, many of these puzzling nighttime experiences suddenly begin to make sense in a completely different way.